Okay, this section is called New England Colonies and is section 3.2. Okay, the learning target for today is I can explain why the Separatists and Puritans left England and settled in North America. Okay, first we need to talk about something called religious freedom. Okay, now the settlers in Jamestown, they came to the Americas not really for religious reasons, but financial reasons, economic reasons. They wanted to make money. But the next wave of colonists, those that came to New England, came because they were in search of religious freedom. And what that means is they wanted a place where they could practice their religion freely without breaking any laws, without being treated unfairly because of that. At the time, everyone in England basically belonged to what was called the Anglican Church, and there were a lot of people that dissented or disagreed with the beliefs of the Anglican Church. And because of that, they were persecuted. Anglicans are, the members of the Anglican Church are Protestants, not Catholics. But there were, and sometimes a lot of the problems came with the Catholics in England, but there were also problems with some of the Protestants. For example, there were some Protestants who wanted to change or reform the Anglican Church. They were generally called Puritans. This is easier to remember if you think about it as they wanted to purify the Anglican Church, hence they were called Puritans. Other Protestants who wanted to leave the Anglican Church entirely, not just change it, but completely leave and start their own churches, these Protestants were called Separatists. Again, it's easy to remember if you think about the fact that they wanted to separate entirely from the Anglican Church. The Separatists in particular were persecuted in England because of their beliefs, and many fled to the Netherlands, another country in Europe. However, they struggled in the Netherlands to find work, and they missed the English way of life. They didn't like the fact that they were raising children who didn't know about their real country, which was England. Okay, so some separatists in the Netherlands, again, they weren't quite happy with where they were, so they made an arrangement with the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company said, okay, well, you can come settle in Virginia. Remember, the Virginia Company is the company that founded Jamestown. And they said, you can come settle in Virginia, and you can practice your religion freely. We won't persecute you. You just have to give us a share of any profits that you make while living in that colony. So the Separatists decided to make the very long and dangerous journey across the ocean to come to North America. They refer to themselves as pilgrims because their journey had a religious purpose. So the word pilgrim really means somebody that journeys somewhere for a religious reason. Okay, so try to remember that pilgrims, that word refers not to the Puritans, but to the Separatists. Interestingly enough, out of the 102 passengers who boarded the Mayflower, which was the ship, were actually pilgrims. The rest of them were called strangers. They weren't necessarily going to North America for religious reasons, but they were just looking for a better life. The Mayflower's passengers, like I said, had planned to settle in Virginia with the Virginia Company, but the first land they sighted was Cape Cod, which is modern-day Massachusetts. Winter was approaching, the waters were dangerous, and so instead of going to Virginia, they decided to settle in modern-day Massachusetts at a place called Plymouth. Because Plymouth was outside of the laws of the Virginia Company, before they got off of the boat and settled in their new land, the Pilgrims decided to draw up a formal document called the Mayflower Compact to be used to help govern the colony and kind of set a mission statement for what their purpose was there. In the Mayflower Compact, they pledged their loyalty to England. Signers agreed to all obey the laws passed for the good of the colony. And this was really a necessary step in the development of representative government in the colonies. Again, representative government is having a government that takes into consideration the opinions of more than just a few people, but really everybody that lives in the area. And here's a picture of a group of pilgrims on the Mayflower creating the Mayflower Compact. During the first winter that they were in Plymouth, lots and lots of pilgrims died. They didn't really know how to work the land and get enough food. They died of malnutrition, diseases that their bodies hadn't been exposed to in England, and some of them even froze to death because of the harsh winter. Fortunately, in the spring, they met two Native Americans named Squanto and Samoset, and those Native Americans befriended the colonists and helped them out. They showed them how to grow corn, showed them where to hunt and fish, and perhaps more importantly, they helped them make peace with the Wampanoag people, who were a tribe in the area. So this is how Squanto and Samoset were really influential in the success of the Plymouth colony. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Puritans. In 1625, Charles I became the King of England, and he particularly objected to the fact that the Puritans in England were calling to change the Anglican Church. So as a result, he further persecuted the Puritans and made them want to leave England. So in 1629, a group of Puritans formed what they called the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They received a royal charter. Now, a royal charter is basically permission from the king, who was all too happy to get the Puritans out of his country. So he gave them a royal charter to establish a colony north of Plymouth. The company chose John Winthrop to be the colony's governor. And in the year 1630, we had 900 men, women, and children. See, this is a little bit different than like the Virginia Company that was mostly just young single men. This is families traveling all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which, and it's cut off, but the Massachusetts Bay Colony is in modern-day Boston, Massachusetts. During the 1630s, more than 15,000 Puritans traveled to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This is referred to as the Great Migration. Thousands and thousands of Puritans making the, again, very dangerous, long journey to have that religious freedom in the New World. At first, the laws were made pretty much just by the governor, John Winthrop, and a couple assistants. By 1634, however, settlers started demanding a larger role in government. They were not happy with just having a few people making all of the decisions. So eventually, participation in government was spread to pretty every adult male church member. Again, so we're not talking women yet, but every adult male was able to vote for the governor as well as town representatives. So this is another step in the direction of bringing representative government to America. Even though the Puritans had faced religious persecution before, they didn't have any sympathy or tolerance for people who did not practice their faith or believe what they did. So basically, as a result of this, many settlers had to kind of leave the Massachusetts Bay Colony and form their own colonies that were a little bit more accepting of their beliefs. One of those colonies is Connecticut. A minister named Thomas Hooker, he did not really approve of the way that Winthrop and the Puritans were running the colony. So he led his congregation through the wilderness to Connecticut, where he founded the town of Hartford. And eventually a couple other towns joined with Hartford to create the colony of Connecticut. Now, the important thing to remember about Connecticut is that this is where actually the first written constitution in America was created, and it was called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, which is a plan for government created by Hooker and his followers. Another colony was called Rhode Island. There was a man named Roger Williams, also a minister, who was kicked out of Massachusetts because a couple of reasons. First of all, he felt strongly that people should not be forced to worship in a certain way. And also, he thought it was wrong that the Puritans took land away from the Native Americans without asking. So these were two very unpopular beliefs in Puritan society. So he was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He took refuge with the Narragansett people, a group of Native Americans who sold him land, and he used that land to found the town of Providence. Eventually, Williams received a charter for a colony east of Connecticut called Rhode Island. And again, this is cut off, unfortunately, but The reason that Rhode Island is so important is because it became the first place in America where people of all faiths could worship freely. You could be whatever religion that you wanted to be, and you could practice that religion without having to worry about being persecuted or treated unfairly. Here is a picture of the 3 colonies that we've been talking about. This is Massachusetts up here. Okay. This is Cape Cod Bay. Over here to the south is Connecticut, and then here is Rhode Island. Okay. Unfortunately, the peace with the Native Americans that had occurred in Plymouth was not something that you would able to see in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And this is pretty much because settlers tended to take Native American land without paying them and without asking permission. So we had some wars break out in 1636. War broke out when 2 traders were killed in Pico territory. Massachusetts sent troops in to punish the Pico, and we get a war break out between those 2 groups. Also, years later, New England went to war with the Wampanoag people and their allies. This war was called King Philip's War because the leader of the Wampanoag was called King Philip. It, unfortunately for the Native Americans, ended in defeat for them. And this is really important to remember because when the natives lost King Philip's War, they really had all of their power in New England destroyed. In other words, they really had no way to compete anymore with the colonists. And this was able to then clear the way for the colonists to expand their settlements and continue colonizing New England without resistance from the Native Americans.